Burton. Now, if the worst is over for the overall economy, can commercial real estate actually start to recover? Well, let's bring in an expert. Marisa Manley is the president of Commercial Tenant Real Estate Representation. It's a national brokerage firm that specializes in representing tenants. Marisa Manley, good to have you with us. Thanks for coming in.
I'm so glad to be here.
What is the state right now of the commercial real estate market? Is it in the doldrums?
Well, Pam, I think we know that real estate is a lagging indicator. And if we look at the data that's out there, what we see is that we're continuing to get what's called negative absorption. And that's a fancy word for saying more space is coming onto the market than it's going off the market. So if we just look at Manhattan, Pam, and we look at Midtown Manhattan, right now we've got about 38 million square feet of vacant space.
38 million square feet of vacant space.
Just in Midtown, if we want to think about that, what does that mean in terms of people? If we use an industry standard of 200 square feet per person, that represents about 171,000 jobs. So that tells us that the real estate market, the commercial real estate market, has a way to go before we start to see a shift in the leverage. Because right now, what we've seen over the last 12 months is a dramatic shift from landlords toward tenants.
Okay, so now that you've got this shift, talk about some of the ways in which a tenant can actually profit from this situation.
Well, and I think there are three kinds of tenants in today's market, Pam. There are tenants that are healthy and growing. There are tenants who have to make a decision. Their business may be stable, it may not be growing, but they've got a lease expiration date. They've got something that is driving a decision. And we've got tenants who are challenged by today's market. And there are opportunities for each of those tenants. For the tenants who are growing and can look forward and say, what do I need over the next 3 or 5 years? They can lock in very, very strong economic terms, but they should go beyond the base rent. They should go beyond the work letter. They really should be looking at the operational terms that affect their business, Pam. That might mean things like signage. It might mean things like the flexibility to terminate a lease early, something that landlords are often very, very reluctant to give. But in today's market, a savvy tenant can get that kind of a non-rent financial and an operating term.
Talk just a little bit about some of the details for those that are not experienced in the world of commercial real estate. What's a work letter, and what would be a typical situation?
Well, you know, a work letter contribution is what we call that, and that is the landlord's cash contribution often to the cost of building out space. Space might cost $40 a square foot to build out. If it's a fancy law firm, it might cost $150 a square foot to build out. So it's a very, very costly undertaking for a tenant. And landlords are often willing to fund a portion of that. And in today's market, Pim, we are seeing situations where landlords are willing to fund as much as 2 years' rent in the work letter.
2 years' rent?
Yep. So if you're paying $20 a square foot, if you're in a suburban market, it might be possible to get as much as $40 in a contribution. Again, I think it's also very, very important to remember that every building is its own micro market, depending on when did the landlord buy it, what's the availability of other space in the building. So it's not a general rule, but it is the case that we are seeing more and more of those opportunities. And what's very, very important for tenants, to get back to your first question, is to create the leverage that's going to serve them by really understanding what are their options in the market. And Pim, that's particularly important for that second class of tenant that might have to make a decision because their lease is expiring. And so very often, Pim, a tenant says, you know what, the cheapest thing, the least costly thing is to renew. But when a tenant makes that decision in the dark, so to speak, they cut themselves off from opportunities. And tenants really need, if a tenant is forced to make a decision because a lease is expiring, they really do need to look at the market, because when you're getting that kind of a capital contribution, the most cost-effective transaction may not be in your own building. It may be moving across town.
You talk about signage, for example, just as something that might be creative for people to understand that they can actually ask for things that in the past they never thought that they had a chance of getting.
Right, and we had talked, there's, you know, this situation in Chicago where a very, very small tenant got its name on a very, very prominent tower, but we're working on a transaction in Philadelphia. It's an empty building, it's an 8-story building. We might wind up being 10% of the building. So we're not the guerrilla tenant that would usually get signage, but the landlord is very, very willing to talk with us about signage at a certain floor level. They're willing to talk with us about giving us what would ordinarily be retail space for an office use. They're willing to let us create our own entrance. So there are many, many ways, Pim, that tenants can gain advantage in today's market.
All right. Well, I want to thank you very much, Marisa Manley, coming in and sharing your thoughts with us and giving us some really expert advice on what tenants can actually ask for in today's commercial real estate market. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.